right here.
Whether or not you follow the science of climate change, it's an undeniable fact that the seas are rising.
We know what's happening. We see it every day.
For 3,000 years, sea levels in Maine were relatively stable. But then, in the 20th century, as more and more greenhouse gases began to accumulate in the atmosphere, the seas began to gradually rise. And in the last 20 years, the pace of sea level rise has accelerated to almost double that of the past century. You see, when we burn coal, oil, and natural gas, excess emissions in the atmosphere act like a heat-trapping blanket. This blanket prevents heat from escaping the Earth's surface, raising the temperature. As the Earth heats up, glaciers and land-based ice sheets begin to melt, releasing trapped water from land into the ocean. And as the oceans warm, they actually expand.
Boy, you looking rugged. You been working out?
Just warming up, buddy.
Intermediate scenarios for Maine forecast nearly 2 feet of sea level rise in the next 30 years. By 2100, 4 feet, with an extreme scenario of over 11 feet.
In many areas of Maine, we already experience high tide flooding that will become more frequent as the seas rise. With the current projections, today's high tide will become tomorrow's low tide.
So whether you live in southern Maine, out on the islands,
Now how are we gonna get up island?
Gonna send it.
or down,
Ain't it a little early to hitch up the plow yet?
Well, we're just plowing up the seaweed guy.
rising oceans threaten to destroy homes and valuable coastal infrastructure, putting working waterfronts at risk, causing flood insurance premiums to skyrocket, lowering property values, and costing communities millions of dollars. That's why we must do everything we can to protect our coast and work together to make our communities more resilient in the face of climate change. Making critical infrastructure more resilient using living shoreline techniques, to preserving and protecting existing wetlands and creating sensible zoning ordinances. Sea level rise is happening, and we've got to be prepared. To find out more, visit www.islandinstitute.org.
Great. So my name is Andy O'Brien, and
I'm Hanji Chang, and this is Laura.
yeah, and actually she made her debut in that video just now as the hermit crab. So we're here to talk a little bit about our educational animations, but we also want to talk a little bit about our creative process and how sort of Maine's unique culture and humor has kind of shaped that. That's right. So up in Maine, we're actually probably most well known for a series called 10 Tales, which is about the adventures of working class Mainers. We call it a work cartoon that's not safe for work because we don't sugarcoat the language. And that's why we're not going to be showing any 10 Tales cartoons today. Yeah, you can Google it. But we did want to explain our creative process and how we got from making dirty, irreverent cartoons to producing climate change animations. So a little bit about ourselves. I was born in a farmhouse in Mid-Coast, Maine. My dad's family settled in Maine in the 1700s, along with all the other squatters that came up from Massachusetts after the Revolution to kind of claim their slice of the frontier in Maine. At the time, much of the land was owned by wealthy proprietors who were well connected to the Crown of England. And a lot of the settlers, maybe my ancestors, I'm not sure, were known to occasionally tar and feather the land agent who were demanding payments for the land. And we've kind of always had kind of a chip on our shoulder about wealthy people from away ever since. It's just never really gone away. But my mom's side of the family is from Illinois, so to a lot of Mainers that makes me half flatland. So my friends from the city say Maine is pretty homogenous. In a lot of ways it is. But I think that it's not entirely accurate because in some ways I think I grew up in kind of a diverse place. We've got the wealthier summer folks, the tradesmen, the fishermen, and a lot of those backlanders who came up in the 70s and had to figure out how the heck to make a living when they realized that farming wasn't a way to make a living. My dad always says that we probably have some of the best educated carpenters around. So I've always loved comics, and I started making comics in high school to pass around to my friends. And several years ago, I tried to make the first Ten Tales comic about my job painting houses on an island. But as you can see, I'm not a very good artist. So the main character in Ten Tales is Reed Bud Kelly, and he's a combination of several guys I've worked with over the years. Bud is one of those fellas who will do just about anything to make ends meet. Whether it's carpentry, painting, paving driveways, masonry, woodcutting, growing pot, you name it. He's a he likes a mud bog in his mud truck, road hunting. He's kind of a cranky old son of a gun, but beneath it all, he's got a heart of gold. Then one October, the painting jobs dried up, as they're wont to do in Maine. And I did what many young people do in Maine, I left the state. And I landed in Taiwan, where I got a job teaching English and playing in a punk rock band, and generally kind of coasting my way through my 20s. But one day, while I was DJing at a bar, I met a young Taiwanese lady with a mohawk, and we hit it up. And we've become artistic collaborators, as she could turn that into that. And that's sort of how O-Chain Comics was born, as an online web cartoon. Comic.
So I am Hanji, and I was a traditional painter and an illustrator, and now a teacher and an animator. I am born from a Taiwanese father, and my mother's Korean, and I spent the first half of my childhood growing up in South Africa during the apartheid. And then after that, pretty much, I grew up in Taipei, which is one of the busiest cities in the world. Which is why it's funny that one day I find myself coming to Maine and slaughtering chickens with my in-laws. With no public transportation to go anywhere. But I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. So even though I sound a traditional painter, but I was also a big comic fan growing up, even though I didn't draw elaborate comics about my friends like Andy did. I've always liked drawing little caricatures of myself and my friend in the end of my diary every day. And this is a diary from 5th grade, and I was getting nervous about a test coming up the next day. And just like Andy said, we met one day in Taipei, and we got along, and one day we decided to come back to Maine and live, and that happened to be 2008. And if you remember, that was during the recession. So as two young people coming back to Maine during the recession, finding a job was not the easiest thing. So we did what we had to do. We started working at different odd jobs, temp jobs, we mowed lawns, we did gardening, we painted houses, we worked at call centers, we cooked in restaurants, dishwashing, we've done pretty much any temp job that is out there. And if you're from Maine, and probably in New Hampshire too, you've probably done all these jobs before too. And so, those jobs were hard, but we also had fun. Andy started documenting stories from the job, and he started turning them into little comic strips. And then I would turn these comic strips into something a little more presentable for people to read on a web comic. And in 2012, I was taking a class at Maine College of Art. And I was taking an animation class at the time, and I thought it would be fun to turn one of our web comics into an and the animation is so bad. The recording is so bad too, if you watch it now. And we posted on YouTube just for fun, and nobody watched it. I think my mom was the only one that watched it, and she doesn't even speak English. And then a few months later, somehow it got posted on a snowmobile forum, and then it sort of went viral from there in Maine. And now, a few years later, around in New England too. And so after that, since we got an audience, we thought, well, maybe we should continue making these animations. So that slowly just became our little mini web series on YouTube called 10 Tales, and it's all about our lives working these marginal jobs, people that we met on the job site, and just living in Maine. And so here's something that they don't tell you about going to art school is you still need to take those math and science classes in order to graduate. And that's exactly what happened to me. And in my senior year studying at Maine College of Art, I had to take one of those classes, and I had a choice between math and marine biology. And I know I'm Asian and I'm supposed to be good at math, but I'm really not. So I picked marine biology thinking it was going to be easier. And then obviously I was wrong. So not only because English is not my first language, but there was a lot of charts, just lots of different languages that I just did not understand. And I really struggled, but I pushed through. I regretted it the second week in that class. But during the course of that class, we went on lots of field trips. We went to the Rocky Shore, we went to Tidal Marsh, and there was this one pesky creature that really caught my attention, because I see it everywhere I go, and that was the green crab. And I got really interested with the green crab, especially after learning how it's really impacting the Maine's coastal ecosystem, and also how it's impacting our fishing industry in Maine. And so. And so I got really, really fascinated with this creature, and so I got studying it more, and then the more I studied, the more obsessed I got with the green crab. So obsessed, I then applied to do an independent study just on the green crab the next semester. And I was very, very lucky to have my professor, Doug, to support this project that I'm doing. He took me out on his canoe, and we went down to the mud flats where Dr. Brian Gill was doing a study in Freeport, where he had fenced-in areas to do samples of clams. And during the studying of the green crab and how it's impacting the clams, I can't help but learning that there is a bigger force that is weakening the shell of the clams. And of course later I learned that it is the ocean acidification. And as you can see by now, I have got myself into this rabbit hole, digging deeper and deeper about climate change, marine biology, and all of this just to avoid a math class. But I have no regret. I never turned back. So at the end of this independent study, I had to write an essay, and writing and reading is is not my best subject in school, nor is math or science. So, so I thought, well, I could write an essay, but I also wonder, am I just gonna write a piece of paper and have it stuck somewhere after it's been graded, and then move on with my life while these creatures are still out there killing clams and mussels? And I also wonder how many people are like me that are just want to learn about this kind of subject, but generally have a hard time understanding the science behind it. So I thought, well, maybe I should, instead of writing this essay, maybe I should use what I know best, animation, to present this essay. So I thought, not only this is a better way for me to communicate visually what I've learned during my study, but I also thought, well, maybe also this could have some kind of impact, maybe even if it just reached few people, it could make a difference. People can learn this kind of stuff. So I created a short animation based on my study on the green crab, and that was called The Attack of the Green Crab. Oh, I showed that.
I lost her on Castle Bay. I am digging on the summer day. And the sea and all its charm won't be the same. Last summer on Castle Bay.
In the past couple of years, the Maine coast has come under siege by a voracious army of green crabs, threatening shellfish populations and mowing down vegetation wherever they go. If the crabs are left unchecked, in a few years, researchers say there may not be even a viable clam industry left in Maine. Originally from Europe, green crabs are believed to have hitchhiked over to America in the ballast of ships 200 years ago and arrived in Maine waters around 1900. Maine has two native crab species that are caught for their meat, Jonah and rock crabs. But green crabs have little meat and are tough to crack, so they're not fished commercially. Although they've been a nuisance on and off throughout the past century, with a lack of natural predators and warming ocean temperatures, green crab numbers have grown exponentially in recent years. It's speculated that green crabs first decimated mussel populations before moving on to their new favorite food, the soft-shell clam. This not only poses a threat to our marine ecosystem, but also our economy. In 2012, soft-shell clams were Maine's third most valuable seafood species, worth a total of $15.6 million. Unfortunately, one survey in Brunswick found that 40% of the clams have disappeared since 2011. With crabs rapidly gobbling up young clams, in 2 to 3 years there may not be any clams left to harvest in many places. Some researchers now worry that the ravenous crustacean may someday get a hankering for the state's most prized fishery, the lobster. Green crabs have also begun obliterating the ecologically vital eelgrass as they clip it down in search of food. Eelgrass serves as a nursery habitat for a variety of marine species, including juvenile lobsters. The impact green crabs will have on Maine's coastal marine ecosystem still remains up to debate. A lot of the old-timers refer back to the 1950s when the number of green crabs surged due to warmer winters at the time.
Oh, it's just a cycle. Few cold winters back in the 60s made short work of them little babbits.
However, as most climate scientists report, the past may not be an accurate barometer as we're in a new era of climate change with an unprecedented rise in global temperatures. Other research suggests that many of the green crabs who arrived in Atlantic Canada during the 1980s may actually be a more cold-tolerant species from Iceland and the Faroe Islands. Some Canadian researchers believe that this northern crab is actually mingled with the green crabs to create the Schwarzen crab, a more aggressive and cold-tolerant hybrid. Although cold winters killed off previous generations of green crabs, anecdotal evidence also suggests that the new invaders have found ways to overwinter by burrowing into salt marshes or moving into deeper water where there are more moderate temperatures.
But whatever the case, it's becoming increasingly clear that in order to save our coastal marine ecosystem and the future of shellfish harvesting in Maine, we can't just sit back and let the armies invade to pillage and plunder our coasts. Only by getting the word out and working together can we conquer this menace.
I lost a lot, can't go by. I am digging on the summer day. And we'll see.
So the attack of the green crab had later became part of my thesis, graduating from Maine College of Art. Had I told the middle school Hanji that your thesis in art school in the future is going to involve a science in a million years, middle school Hanji would not believe that. And so with the green crab video and our own template animation, together we got enough notoriety, and eventually we started working with different groups, and I'm proud to say that now we own a small animation studio in Rockland, Maine. By small animation studio, I meant one hand animating and the other hand bouncing a baby. And so we are fortunate enough to start working with lots of organizations, lots in Maine, but also a lot from out of state. And one thing that I thought was worth mentioning is that to me it was really important that we know that we would never take a job just for money. We would never produce any content that we never believe in. So we've been fortunate enough to work with organizations, nonprofits, and businesses to create ads, explainer videos, educational videos that we really believe in, and so that's pretty much our life now.
It's funny, she's at that age where she has very limited vocabulary, and so she knows how to say baby shark. She likes that. She goes like baby chat, so you might hear her saying baby chat, because now around here she looks at all the pictures and she's like baby chat, baby chat. Whether it's a fish or a whale or just water in general, actually. So back to Temtails for a second. So meanwhile, while we were working on a lot of that, we gradually created our Temtails world with characters I think a lot of Midlanders can identify with. There's Mr. Jacobson, the crusty old lobsterman, Toddy, the young ne'er-do-well who drives a jacked-up mud truck and occasionally lays a big old rubber patch in the middle of town for all to hear and see. He's kind of like a misunderstood artist. There's the only law enforcement in town, kind of based on our old constable back in my hometown, Constable Bumgardner, a part-time constable / bus driver / postman / road commissioner. And his only uniform, as far as we could tell, was a pair of sweatpants and a beer-stained NFL t-shirt. And then there's Garth and Bunny. Most tradesmen on the Maine coast have dealt with a character like Garth, the condescending wealthy summer resident who is never happy with anything you do on the job. One of my favorite notes I got from a Garth I worked for said, "Every time I see those wavy lines you painted behind the toilet, I cry." So let's get to the science. So as the popularity of our cartoon grew, it became kind of a cultural phenomenon in Maine and parts of New Hampshire as well. To the point where young guys would be driving up to me on the street and shouting out words from our cartoon. What are you going to make another cartoon? So we started thinking about whether we could use our cartoons to draw attention to a cause that we're passionate about, which is fighting climate change. So we came to this project with the belief that even people who deny climate change is happening, deep down, that we are careening towards catastrophe. Unfortunately, we've all been sold the myth that we have to solve problems. The only way we can solve problems is through infinite growth. infinite economic growth and halting climate change will require an unprecedented collective mobilization and a massive redistribution of resources and power, which is kind of an affront to the cherished spirit of American freedom and individualism. So we're dealing with some real big issues on the political front. And the climate change is also tied up in the culture wars and sort of class tensions that have been roiling in the country lately. Fossil fuel companies, climate change denialists have been very successful in their efforts to smear people who care about the environment with a kind of caricature, the effete Prius driving elitist like Darth, or the tourists, I hear this a lot back home. They're like, there's tourists clogging up the roads in the summer on their bikes, while the rest of us have to get to work. Like driving a bike is somehow now, riding a bike is elitist. So there's this really effective propaganda effort to make people believe that elites are making it all up as a way to somehow control average people. And I think a lot of the mistrust of the science behind climate change comes from this anti-elitism that's so sort of woven into our culture. So how do we cut through the politics and engage the people we need to reach with the science that so many of you have been studying? Well, unlike the two of us, many of our fans are pretty conservative. So our goal in creating the climate calamity in the Gulf of Maine series is to try to convince our fellow rural Mainers that warming water temperatures and ocean acidification is really going to have a critical implication on natural resource industries like fishing, farming, and forestry that rural economies depend on and defines our unique culture as Mainers. Fortunately, we have a friend who works for the University of Maine Sea Grant, who's also a fan and was excited about our idea to create a series of climate change animations. So she had us write up a proposal with our budget, a synopsis, and who the audience we hope to reach are, and how we would promote the video and other information. Then she went to work finding funding. Finally, after months of research, script writing, editing, having material reviewed by a team of scientists, to ensure the accuracy and then the animating, we finally created our first cartoon, which was The Lobster Pot Heats Up. And it was nominated for a National Science Foundation. I'm trying to think. Cool.
The lobster is by far the most iconic species of sea life in the Gulf of Maine, a symbol of our state's cultural heritage and our fiercely independent spirit. The large marine crustacean is also the source of $1 billion industry, with more than 5,000 licensed lobstermen and women supporting a vast economic and cultural infrastructure of boat builders, lobster trap producers, bait dealers, restaurants, and many more. In recent years, the Gulf of Maine's population of lobsters has exploded, with a record catch of nearly 124 million pounds in 2014. That's nearly double the catch just 10 years ago and 6 times that of the 1980s. But at the same time, lobster numbers are plummeting in southern New England, and the culprit, scientists say, is rapidly warming ocean temperatures. Although you wouldn't have known it here in Maine, the winter of 2015 was the hottest year on record in the rest of the world. And despite a few cold winters, even the cool waters of the Gulf of Maine are heating up. Between 1982 and 2004, temperatures in the Gulf rose up about 0.05 degrees per year, but then suddenly that pace accelerated nearly 10 times faster to about half a degree per year. By some measures, the Gulf of Maine is heating up faster than 99% of the world's oceans. At that rate, the Gulf's temperature is expected to rise more than 4 degrees by the end of the century. For our cool water-loving lobsters, that could be catastrophic. Lobsters are cold-blooded creatures who are sensitive to varying water temperatures. Higher temperatures cause lobsters to use more energy for respiration and less energy for growing,
feeding, reproduction, storing energy, and fighting off diseases. As ocean temperatures rise, they become stressed and more vulnerable to shell diseases and parasites.
Looks like something from out of The Walking Dead.
These days, lobsters can roam more freely ever since fishermen overfished all other commercial species, including cod, their biggest predator. But with warmer waters come new threats from the south, like black sea bass, which have been terrorizing the lobster's southern New England cousins. While scientists believe the lobster boom in the Gulf of Maine may be related to less predators in the Gulf and warmer temperatures in the south, if trends continue, even the iconic Maine lobster may be forced to make the trek further north or face extinction. One study has found that the American lobster has shifted 43 miles northward in the last decade, and lobstermen have seen the evidence of the migration firsthand.
I can tell you one thing, Mr. Man. The hotspots are moving up.
And as overfishing and climate change has led to the decline of all other commercial fish in the Gulf of Maine, our coastal communities are even more reliant on lobsters than ever before. We may enjoy our lobster boom now, but as the effects of global climate change push lobsters further north, the future remains uncertain, not only for our delicious state dish, but also our beloved fishermen, our working waterfronts, and the traditional lifeblood of our coastal communities.
So, I think that humor can bring some levity to serious issues and hopefully foster communication. While I think we need to be honest about these dire climate change predictions, I also think fear tends to paralyze people, and it makes them retreat into denialism. And so, we found that the best way to do that is with humor. That appears... And so we found the best way to do that is with humor that appeals to both adults and especially their kids, who are definitely the most open to learning about this stuff. In fact, our fans say that our climate cartoons are probably the only okay cartoons that they can actually show their kids. And most importantly, we need to provide a message of hope that we can solve this crisis if we work together. So the next one that I wanted to show was one we worked on with Cassie. And it's called Acid in the Gulf About Ocean Acidification. This one was particularly challenging because it involves a lot of chemistry, and chemistry was not my greatest subject in school. So I actually had a lot of difficulty with science in general, just like Anji when I was in school. And so this is why sort of writing and designing these cartoons actually helps me a lot with my learning of the material. And so it involved a lot of consulting with scientists and making sure we got it right, but in the end, I think it turned out okay. So I think we can bring up Acid in the Gulf now, right? Yeah, there we go.
The shores of Atlantic Canada and the coasts of Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts down to the tip of Cape Cod make up the boundaries of the Gulf of Maine. The Gulf is known the world over for its flourishing populations of shellfish, mammals, and seabirds. For hundreds of years, the Gulf's bounty has fed the region's inhabitants, provided thousands of jobs, and sustained the unique cultural character of its coastal communities. But as humans continue to burn fossil fuels to power our global industrial economy, the Gulf's marine ecosystem has become threatened by warming ocean temperatures and the changing chemistry of the air and oceans. While about half of the carbon dioxide burned from fossil fuels stays in the atmosphere, about 25% of it goes into the ocean, which is why we call it a carbon sink. The big problem is that when CO2 goes into the ocean, it reacts with seawater to form corrosive carbonic acid. As the carbonic acid breaks down, it releases hydrogen ions, which combine with carbonate in the water, inhibiting the formation of the vital molecule calcium carbonate. Creatures like clams, lobsters, mussels, shrimp, scallops, oysters, sea urchins, and corals use calcium carbonate as the building blocks to form their shells. With fewer calcium carbonate molecules, they have to spend more energy for shell production, which hinders their ability to grow. And if the water gets too acidic, it could even dissolve their shells. Scientists also believe that the Gulf of Maine is especially vulnerable to acidification because of the complex flow of freshwater from the region's many large rivers, as well as cold freshwater from the Gulf of St. Lawrence and snow and ice melt brought down from the Arctic by the Labrador Current. Because carbon dioxide is more soluble in cold water, and fresh water has lower concentrations of carbonate and calcium ions, the region's unique geography further exacerbates the acidifying effect. Scientists also worry about nutrient loading, which is when the waste nitrogen and phosphorus from sewage, livestock, fertilizers, and various industries run into the ocean, stimulating massive phytoplankton blooms. Excessive phytoplankton produces even higher levels of CO2 as they decompose, which makes the waters more acidic, especially around coastal mudflats and salt marshes where mussels, clams, baby oysters, and other sea larvae thrive. Rain and snowfall also increases the level of runoff that brings nutrients into the Gulf, and the warming climate is expected to bring even more precipitation to the region. With rapidly melting polar ice caps and more rain and snow, the Gulf of Maine shellfish could be facing a perfect storm of acidifying waters, as ocean acidity has already increased by a whopping 30% during the last 70 years alone. Normally, the ocean waters would be able to take in all of that CO2 without too much trouble. But because the chemical changes are happening much, much faster than any naturally occurring changes during the past 200,000 years, many scientists believe the ocean life may not be able to adapt to it fast enough. And although ocean acidification may be more harmful to some marine animals than to others, the Gulf of Maine is an intricate food web. The death of one species may cause permanent changes in the entire Gulf's marine ecology. But this time, we can do something about it. In addition to taking action on reducing CO2 emissions, we also need to learn more about the causes and impact of ocean acidification on our most treasured Gulf of Maine resources and our way of life. Humans may have contributed to the acid in the oceans, but we can also take steps to stop it. To find out more, visit www.necan.org.
And so, even though this wasn't a main driving force for me, or to prevent me from starting a family, but there was always this little voice behind my back asking, where is the future going? What's going to happen to the next generation? And that creates a lot of fear, the thought of bringing another life to this world. Then I paused and thought, we can't let fear prevent us from continuing with our lives. There is a lot of fear happening these days, but it shouldn't stop us from doing what we think is the right thing to do, and to continue living with our lives. And I think where there is life, there is hope, and hopefully we can take this hope and pass it on to the next generation, and also be part of something bigger than myself, to make sure that the next generation has a better life than we do. And with that, we will end our talk today. Thank you.
We can take any questions if you've got them. We've got a few minutes left, I think 15 minutes or so.
So I manage a website called The Bridge. Some people here may have heard of it. We talk about it all week. And it is a resource website for teachers, and we index resources like this. However, are these hosted on the same YouTube channel as the ones that we wouldn't want kids coming across? Okay, just checking before I start indexing. Would you mind if I index some of these on The Bridge?
No, absolutely, go ahead.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, they're on, these are on Ochang Studios, the other ones are on Ochang Comics. Very close. Different. Any other questions?
What's next?
What's next?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I'm really interested in working on sort of visions for, you know, for what to do about the problem. Like, I think most people know deep down that this is a problem, that this is a crisis that we're facing, and we need to do something about it. And I think we need to come up with real aspirational visions for people to really think about, because these can raise people's expectations. I think that we haven't had a lot of good news in a long time. You know, we know what we need to do to fight climate change. You know, we need to make massive investments in renewable energy and rail and all this kinds of stuff. But I think it's really hard for people to really get their head around that. And so I think I would like to focus on some of these visions. I mean, somebody already did it actually. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did her Message from the Future, which I thought was a really uplifting video animation about how she sees a future that could be better than the one we have now. We could fight climate change and make a better future for our children. So I'm interested in that. I'm also interested in other ways that climate change will affect the Gulf of Maine, like seabirds, for instance. Sometimes it's easier to get funding when we're talking about how climate change affects like commercial species, because that's where the money is, like lobsters and shellfish and things like that. But I think that there's a lot more we can do, and so I'm also open to ideas as well.
And we've also just finished a series of videos working with Louisiana Sea Grant about Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and there was a great video about how the fish told with oil and how they cleaned up the oil. So that's what we've been working on the past year. So,
You mentioned that a lot of your 10 Tails fans are more conservative than you are.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how they've been receiving your climate change videos.
I mean, it's been mixed. You know, a lot of lobstermen you talk to, I mean, they know what's going on. You know, they're close to the water. They can, you know, they know what's happening. They know that the lobsters are moving. You know, you talk to any clammers, they know exactly what's going on with the green crabs, that's for sure. And people who work in the shellfish, you know, aquaculture industry, they understand ocean acidification. And so, you know, some people shut down. I think even when they see the lighthearted animation, they're like, what are you trying to brainwash the kids? But again, you know, I think it's important that we can reach kids who are more open-minded, you know, maybe reach their kids. But it hasn't been that bad. It really hasn't been. I mean, I think that people get it, and if they don't like it, you know, I'd rather watch your Tails cartoons. So, yeah.
Kind of on that same note, in thinking about, you have a lot of local Maine, New Hampshire viewers, and of course you're talking also about taking it to the other coast. How about inland? Any thoughts of bringing that message to other industries to get that lighthearted message across for, Colorado, Kansas, Midwest? I mean, there's a lot of, I would say, deniers of climate change out there too, and we need to find a way to hit their hearts with these lighthearted videos too.
Well, I'm really interested in food. It's certainly in the heartland we grow a lot of food, and climate change is going to have a really adverse impact on how we grow food. I'm also interested in ice fishing, and you know, a lot of people all over America in the north like to ice fish, and you know, that's something that I think people, at least in inland Maine, would be concerned about sort of a, not as serious thing, but for some people it is. So that, and I guess I'd be sort of open to it. We started this with just trying to reach a really small audience of Northern New England, and I am interested in branching out, but I have to think about it a little bit.
Being a teacher, I have a number of students that take classes that parents want them to take, other teachers, and they are more artistically inclined. And I know I had one student in the AP class that incredible drawing for that test. And that's what he wants to go into, is the art. What would you recommend for me? I'm going to have more students that are like that they're trying to keep pushing them, having that science impact as well, and still following their dreams of the arts. So, for me, I was always a visual learner. I studied really hard in school, but no matter how hard I studied, I'm just really bad at taking tests. And the thing that I thought was really helpful for me when I was doing my project was my professor was just very, very supportive of any medium I could use. He gave me the freedom to do, he would give me the resource I need, introduce me to people that I need to meet and talk to, but gave me the complete freedom of how I want to present this project. And using visual language, for me, is the easiest way. So for me, that was very encouraging and made me wanted to do more. So I thought that, to me, that was the best way to let students like me to be able to learn science.
We are also from Taiwan. Yeah, I'm proud of what you are doing for the job, and it's very important. So, do you cooperate with any field teachers to promote your program? Because the kids that your videos, and that is interesting, but sometimes they will be difficult to understand about that. So, do you do some cooperation? Thank you.
You mean in general or in Taiwan?
In general.
Not really, but we have a lot of educators and teachers contact us and ask if we can, if they can show our video. We would love to collaborate with more educators and teachers, and especially teachers for younger students. We just really didn't have that kind of resource yet, but we're definitely open to collaborating with educators.
Have you met Jeff and Deb Sandler, Mr. and Mrs. Fish, yet?
I don't think so.
They're not here today, but they were here Monday. But they have antique videos that they've been in the business of Mr. and Mrs. Fish camp for over 40 years. They just retired out of Portland or South Portland. And they're life members of our organization. And they'd be fun to know.
Yeah.
And fun to collaborate with. And if you need an introduction, I'll give it to them.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
No, they're not.
Steve over here is a teacher. He just showed me a poster of the students using cartoons to better understand oceans information. So, Steve, too. Are there other questions? We have one more.
Such a beautiful opportunity to never spell STEM without an A, because the arts and humor, which is an art, are what communicate science, technology, engineering, and math to people who don't speak science, technology, engineering, and math. Artists are essential for us to be steaming under sail.
I like that, steaming. We should push that a lot. I think that, when we started out, that's why we started, because we didn't see a lot of these animations. And I think we should have a whole new generation of animators to reach people, or different ways that we can use art. Anybody else?
I was curious if you ever mentor or if you'd be interested in mentoring young animators and artists.
presentation of their story to inspire them, we can make that available. Thank you, Andy, Hanji, and Nora.